Thank you very much all for coming. As you know, I'm Alex, and I hope you all have figured out from this beautifully flattering photo that I play rugby, way before Ms. Badlow has even mentioned I play rugby. And I'm going to talk to you today, as it says, about life as a female athlete. But the purpose of this talk really is to kind of raise visibility around female athleticism, hopefully inspire you a little bit in regards to what it takes, what sort of effort and passion it takes to when you want to compete at a higher level. And unfortunately, to remind you still that sexism and discrimination still feature in parts of our society. It's getting better, but it is important that we keep these conversations going. So a bit about me. As was mentioned, I worked at Eltham College for 8 years before I finally left. And I used to play Premiership rugby, and actually Eltham College played a massive part in me playing Premiership rugby, which I will cover further down the slides. I currently play in the Championship, which is one level below Premiership. So for reference, the Premiership in England is called Premier 15s. It is currently the best ranked domestic league in the world. We have lots and lots of players from America, from Australia, from New Zealand coming down just to play rugby in England, because nowhere else is women's rugby domestically set up so well. So for any budding female athletes, great news for you. You've got the resources right at home. Currently, like I say, I play one below Championship, one below Premiership, which is Championship for Blackheath, and I captained the side this year. I played for Richmond. I got 42 caps, Premiership caps from them. I played briefly for Saracens. I got 4 caps for them. And I play in the front row. For anyone who knows, that means I play either prop or hooker. And I've been playing nearly more or less for a decade, which is a very sobering realization, and I think it explains why I have to take magnesium supplements every morning now. But in my Prem days, I played regularly against teams like Wasps, Harlequins, and Saracens when I wasn't wearing their shirts, and I played at venues like Allianz Park, which is now called Zdunek Stadium, or Twickenham Stoop, and I played with and against current and future and past internationals, which is just a brilliant feeling to have, to be running out next to ex-England players. And I'm mentioning that just to kind of drive home the point of how great the Women's Premiership is really set up and how important and how of a high standard it is. I will leave as much time at the end for you for Q&A, because as much as I love talking about myself and rugby, it is important that you get any questions answered that you might have, or if I've not covered anything, please don't be shy, ask away. I will answer any questions you throw at me within reason. Right, so I will start with this, and that is the misconception regarding physicality in women. So that is usually the biggest misconception in women's rugby. Rugby is a physical sport, right? I'm sure you've seen it, you've played it. It is a physical sport, and it requires a certain level of aggression and strength. And given how women are perceived in society, it is not always unsurprising that people don't think women and rugby mix, because we're not that compatible, supposedly. However, I can assure you, I tackle, and I have to be tackled, and it hurts just as much as it would to a guy, but I have to get up just as much as anyone else. And for those who actually play rugby, you'll notice that actually that's quite poor form. I went in too high to carry the ball, I went in too high to make the tackle, but I didn't have any good shots to share with you. So ignore the poor technique, just admire the aggression I went into with it. So like I said, I have to tackle, I bleed, I bruise, I break my bones just like anyone else. And just like everyone else, including my teammates, I get up after every tackle and continue for the next 79 minutes, because that is rugby. And it's no surprise that women don't disintegrate like delicate flowers, because we have bodies that can do pretty much the same things that men can do as well. And more importantly, to accommodate this level of physicality, the training has to be equally appropriate, because at the end of the day, you train to a standard, not to your gender. And I am sure this comes as no surprise to you then that in order to play at a high level, dedication and commitment are essential. So let's look at the training schedule of a male rugby Premiership player. It's more or less a 9-to-5 job, because guess what? That is their job. They have to put that time in to hone their skills and perfect their craft. So if you look at my schedule, that was my average schedule. More or less, I also had to do 2 hours training to hone my craft. But there is one difference, and I'm going to just put it side by side, and I'm sure you will figure out what that difference is. And that is that all my training had to be done around a 9-to-5 job, whereas that is their work. And that has a massive impact also on the type of training I can do. Because realistically, if I get 4 or 5 hours sleep, can I be lifting and squatting 150 kilos in the gym? Probably not. Whereas these guys will be able to because they're rested enough. So I think that is the biggest difference in all of that. We still are expected to put the same level in, because a level of work in, because we are still considered elite as women, but we're considered amateur, which means that we don't get paid for it, or we don't get a livable salary to do that as a full-time job. Whereas guys, they're considered professional and elite, which means that they can do all of that as part of their day job. And just for reference, well, this is actually slowly changing. I don't want it to make it too much of a, that we don't get paid, because England women players can get paid full-time. So you can get contracted to play full-time, but you'll be contracted to play by your country, not your club. So if you're only, I say only, a Premiership rugby player that's associated with a club, you won't be full-time. You will still have to have a job on top of that. And just for reference, at the height of my career, I was getting paid £36 per match after tax, because I got taxed on it. Petrol cost me £50 per week. So I was still making a bit of a loss. And right at the beginning of my career, I actually had to pay £250 to the rugby club to let me play Premiership. So things are evolving, but they're not quite at this level yet. So let's just, again, compare some of the changes. We know that the main job is the biggest difference, but with that come salary implications as well, like I say. So if it's your main job, and a male rugby player in my position would be getting paid about £25,000 to £50,000 a year, plus endorsements. Whereas, like I say, I would be getting £50 per match pre-tax. So that's a quite big difference. There are perks, so the men will get all their kit provided for them, including the boots. They'll get top-notch medical care that will fast-track them through any serious injuries. They get food provided for them, very important. When you're having to train a lot, it's very important to get the right food in you. They'll also get an accommodation allowance. Whereas in my case, the perks would be we get some free kit, never boots, because they're quite expensive. Usually it's going to be socks, shorts, a training top if the money permits for that in that season. And we do have access to a physio, but it won't be necessarily on the same level to be fast-tracked through serious surgeries to get us back to playing as soon as possible. The other difference is what I call the difference between celebrity status and recognition status. Obviously, celebrity status is pretty obvious, you know. You will recognise a male Premiership rugby player, you'll probably stop them on the street, you'll ask them for a selfie, for an autograph, you'll admire them. What I call recognition status is what I have, is that you won't necessarily recognise me on the street and stop me for an autograph, for a selfie. Why would you? My face is not plastered over posters. But when we get talking and I tell you what I do, I'm often met with a very positive response and people recognizing the work I put in, and they're very encouraging of it. So that is the difference. One is celebrity status, one is recognition status. Again, I am mindful that the women's game is now getting, you know, up and it's really getting more popular, and you might be able to recognize Marley Packer or Poppy Cleal, but they're more in the minority than the majority if you think about how many Premiership rugby players there are versus how many international players there are. But all of that is underpinned by this bottom point. And that is, one has a lot more opportunities to start playing rugby, and one has a lot less opportunities to start playing rugby. I believe for boys, the average starting age is about 11. And when I started playing, I think the average starting age for girls was 18. At least that was definitely my experience, because any rugby players that I spoke to in my age group told me they started playing rugby at university and they didn't have opportunities to start playing before. That is slowly changing. I am seeing a lot more junior sections popping up all over the place, but even to field the match, they have to come together. So it's not like you have a single team of junior girls playing. They have to usually merge with another section from another club to put a match out together. For reference, I myself started playing rugby at 22, which is very, very late. And that was simply because rugby was never an option. I'm not saying I would have taken it at the age of 11 or 18, but it was never an option. I was never given the chance to play rugby or exposure to play rugby. And in my personal case, where I started playing rugby so late, I'm not just managing the really intense schedule, I'm constantly playing catch up. Because if you put just for visualization, if I started playing at 18, by 31, the age I am now, I would have touched the ball a lot more times. I would have made a lot more tackles just because I started earlier. Where I started at the age of 22, I'm probably just a preteen in rugby years because I've had a lot less chance to throw the ball around because it's just time. Unfortunately, you can't always make time. You can only make the most of what you've got available in front of you. Now, saying all that, that was my Premiership years. I now play in the Championship. For various reasons, I had to step down from the Premiership, mainly because I had to start prioritising my career. I could no longer juggle the requirements of the Premiership with, if I ever wanted to progress and have a mortgage, I had to make some hard choices to do that. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to show you my current schedule in the Championship, because the Championship is still one below Premiership. So more or less pretty similar, isn't it? I would say for me, personally, it feels a little bit less intense, but that's because I'm traveling less. I'm not traveling from one end of London to another to make training. I actually can use the time that I would be usually commuting, which would be 2 to 4 hours a day, to get to training a little bit more productively. But I'm still training more or less twice a day. Minimum, I'm training once a day, because I still play at a relatively high level. You won't get any promotion for the Women's Championship, but we are still the second highest level in the country. And if I want to turn up, and if I want to make my tackles, want to score my tries, want to safely come off the match after 80 minutes, I still have to train more or less like I was in the Premiership. Particularly now, as a captain, I have to lead by example, and I have a lot of other consideration. I can't just turn up willy-nilly and play and just think of me as a player. I have to think of the whole team. I have to think of the coaches. It's a completely different set of requirements on me. So a little bit less intense. I've had to make some adaptations for work, but still have to put the work in. You'll also notice that there's a very important part of my Friday night, which is watch rugby. And that is not just because I love going to the pub, eating chips and drinking Diet Coke, but because watching rugby is very, very important when you play rugby. You need to visualize, you need to learn from the commentators, you need to see the high standard in front of you if you ever want to be at it. So from my previous schedule, this actually wouldn't be featuring on that because I didn't have time. And I am sure that hindered my game understanding and therefore my performance, because this is very important. I don't just sit there chatting to my mates. I sit there very silently, not talking to anyone, taking notes. So I'm a joy to be in the pub on a Friday night with. But there is a reason I always end on this slide, and that is because what I'm telling you is not a sob story, guys. I love rugby. There's a reason I'm smiling so much, and that's not just because I scored my second try of the game, okay? I love what I do. I am passionate about what I do. Rugby has been a massive driving force in my life and has changed me so much as a woman to the person I am today. So I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I just want you to understand what a lot of female rugby players have to do in order to maintain that passion and nurture themselves as people. I was very lucky. I said that at the beginning. When I was at Eltham College, they played a massive part in my Premiership career. That is because I had a boss who let me train. That's because I had a boss who was a lot more flexible with my holiday allowance, who would understand why I'd be falling asleep at my desk. I had colleagues who'd come and turn up with a coffee when I was falling asleep at my desk. So they played a massive part in my rugby career. But I know I'm lucky, and I know I'm in the minority. There are lots of women who have to factor in, and I've seen a lot of women who had to step away from Premiership rugby in their prime because they had to pick between family, career, and rugby. And that is a very hard choice to make when other people aren't necessarily helping you with that. And the women game is progressing. The RFU does grant full-time playing contracts to the England squad, but that big change didn't come out of nowhere. It came from the fact that we had more girls wanting to play rugby, there was more visibility of women's game, there was more outrage that the game wasn't publicised. So those girls put the work in to get the contracts, but they were surrounded by a lot of people who supported them to do that. So although you may not be part of a massive campaign to equalise women's pay, to get rid of discrimination in sports, you might be just the thing that helps someone else fight that fight. So if you do that small gesture that frees someone up, like in my case, when someone just brought me a coffee, it meant I could at the very least drive to training. And then when I got to training, someone else could have done something that helped me get through training. So those small gestures are what makes those big changes. So please don't be daunted. You're not expected to come out of this room and change the world, but maybe change someone's day just that little bit to help them change their day to eventually change the world. And like I say, whether you're a manager, you become a manager who's a little bit more relaxed with their allowance, or just that colleague that brings a coffee or a sweet snack, or just those words of encouragement, that is how we make changes in life. Because they are just the building blocks for that massive, massive change that's due to happen. So like I say, it's not a sob story, guys. I love what I do. I wouldn't change it. But hopefully, in a couple of generations, someone won't be having to get up at 5 a.m. to do what I'm doing. They will just be able to rock up on that pitch and just have fun without thinking about the job they have to get to. That's it. Thank you very much for listening, guys. Now, any questions? I also welcome injury questions. I know they're very popular. Yeah?
I have a question for the lower pay thing. How could there be equal pay for what are the steps need to be taken to get closer to equal pay?
Good question. There's a lot of theories. I personally think it needs to come from sponsorships. Businesses just need to be happy to sponsor women's game, get them more televised. Right now, you can watch one women's Premiership game per week on BBC iPlayer, which is a massive change, because when I started playing rugby, we would have 2 games televised a year for the whole Premiership. So I think increasing visibility, which would be promoting women's game and actually investing money to televise it, and sponsorship just coming through and just maybe rather than giving the club the money, they go, okay, what can we do for the player to help them get? Can we maybe increase their match day fees, or can we maybe help them with petrol, cover the petrol to training? So I would say there's a lot of schools of thought. I would say personally sponsorship to the women's game, and also people understanding when they're making the sponsorship that it's not going to be an overnight return on investment. You've got to be patient with it. The women's rugby is one of the fastest growing sports there is, but you're not going to get your return on investment tomorrow. So I would say sponsor and be patient with that.
Yeah. What was the worst injury that ever happened to you playing?
God, such a common question. I love it. So my probably most serious injury was I got a back injury when I first started playing, but it's not that I broke my back or anything, I twinged a muscle. That's meant that I couldn't really perform very well. So that is probably my most serious, because I've been having to manage it for 8 years. So all my training incorporates that back injury into it. But the one that's probably been the most painful is when someone sprinted off my hand and carved out with their studs a load of skin, and I had to have skin glued back on. And that was most painful, because even though it's just flesh wound, I could not do that was the first time ever I actually had to be carried off a pitch because I couldn't stand up. I was in so much pain. And there is a reason for it. Your hands and your feet don't have any padding in it. So all my nerve endings just went, and that was the only time ever I actually begged to come off the pitch. My leg could be hanging off and I'll be like, coach, I can do it. But with that one, I was just like, I didn't know whether I was coming or going. It only took me out for 2 weeks. But to this day, I still remember that pain.
What do you recommend to young girls who want to start playing rugby but don't know if they are going to get bullied or not?
This is I would say, advice for everyone. You're going to get bullied for something in your life, because bullies love to bully. So just do it. Because if it's not going to be rugby, they'll bully you for your eye colour. If it's not going to be your eye colour, it'll be the coat you're wearing. So just do it. Because the benefits for rugby for me outweighed any negative comments I've ever received. So just do it. I know it sounds very basic, very pedestrian, but there will always be someone who has something negative to say about you. So why play them at their own game? Play your own thing. Yeah?
Did you ever get any head injuries?
I have been concussed twice in my life, but that was very at the beginning of my career when it was much lower level of rugby and people weren't tackling very well. So a lot of concussions come actually from poor technique. And actually back then, concussions weren't very taken seriously, so I actually played through them, which you should never, ever do. And now I'm actually horrified at the fact that someone let me play with a concussion. But again, I got lucky. It was a mild concussion. I managed to walk it off. But I haven't been concussed since that time. And that is, I think, because I started playing at a higher level where it's a lot safer, because people actually tackle correctly. Yeah?
Do you wear a scrum cap?
No, I don't. They annoy me. I tried one season, but I get too sweaty under them. So I just used to take them off. I will only wear a gum shield because that is also concussion prevention. And it's a psychological thing for me. If I'm wearing a gum shield, I'll hit harder. But I have a lot of friends who will wear gum shields. Oof, I spoke too harshly. It got a nosebleed. Any other questions?
Alex, I have one.
Yeah.
So you just kind of talking about injuries and safety. So if you were to give any advice to all these maybe young rugby players in the room, is there anything they can do to help maybe prevent injury or train for it, or what would you say?
Great question, and that is that gym schedule. You have to do gym outside of rugby. Turning up to training twice a week to run around with your mates and pass a ball is not enough to prevent injuries. You have to be training in the gym. That doesn't mean lifting heavy, it just means training cleverly. So get professional advice, whether that is from a teacher, someone who actually knows, someone who has played. I know you have a lot of teachers who have played at a higher standard, high level. They will have strength and conditioning tips for you. So it is absolutely essential that gym comes into your training. And again, it doesn't have to be gym. I work out at home now. I have a sandbag, I have a couple of resistance bands. That does the job because I'm strengthening my joints to take me through the heavy load I'm going to be doing on a Sunday for 80 minutes, especially as a front row. So absolutely, you have to have a program outside of rugby if you want to have a long career. I've started at 22, I'm now 31. I have never missed more than 3 games in a row. That is partly as well because when I broken my bones, I did it right at the end of the season. But in terms of any injuries like muscle injuries, I actually was able to play through a lot of them because I had the initial strength in them. I got kicked in the ankle once and it was only a partial dislocation because of the strength and conditioning I was doing on an ankle before. Completely unrelated, it was completely related to a different injury, but that stopped it from being a full dislocation to partial dislocation. And that is a big difference. So you have to put the work in. Like I say, playing at a higher level requires a lot of sacrifice, a lot of hard work. It's great, guys. It's brilliant. It's absolutely awesome running out onto the pitch in a stadium full of people, or having someone stopping you for a picture after the game. But it does mean you can't skirt around Monday to Friday. You have to put the work in. And I think that applies to everything. You want to succeed at something, you have to put the work in outside of the mandatory training session. Yes?
Well, you mentioned that rugby provided a lot more benefits than anyone could ever discourage you from doing. What sort of benefits were they?
Confidence in me, in myself as a person. I never fit into the mold of what women were expected to be, and I've struggled to find the place where I could be that unapologetically, and that's what rugby gave me. I remember once I said in an interview, I said, if I can do this for 80 minutes, what's the worst thing you can do to me? Because if I can get hit, get back up, get hit, get back up, I will do that outside of rugby as well, because that will be my mentality. It's just having that confidence to be yourself and knowing that if you get hit, bless you. If you get hit, just get back up because the hit will come again anyway, right? So you might as well take it on your terms. So it's given me the confidence to be myself and confidence to keep going no matter how hard things get.
Have you ever injured someone else before?
Yeah, I did. It's not great. I broke someone's arm in a scrum, but that was again poor coaching from the opposition coaches. They put quite an experienced front row in front of me after they've just had an England front row. So I was going fully, and I just didn't mitigate for the fact that the girl maybe had less experience. And when the scrum collapsed, she got injured. So yeah, but that's again only one time it happened in my career. Yes.
I'm always really keen for young people to hear the career journey of the people who speak to them. So I would love for you to share, please.
Yes.
What degree did you do? And how? And maybe a little bit about your masters.
Yeah.
And so therefore the pathway.
Yeah. So I actually went to drama school. So I have a degree in European Theatre Arts from drama school, which is why I have no problem talking about myself in front of a group of people. I then worked in a pub because I didn't really know what to do. And through rugby, I got a job at Eltham College. And it was then at Eltham College that I decided to do a master's in English, and I did that on Wolverine. My dissertation was on Wolverine. And that's when I started playing rugby. So my whole career got put on hold. And once rugby started to shift, I got another job in Pancreatic Cancer UK as a database officer. And now I work at Doc Martens in the intellectual property legal team managing the database. So if there's ever an example of someone who doesn't follow a linear route, that would be me, guys. I studied at a drama school. I did a master's in English on Wolverine. I worked in a pub. I worked in alumni relations. I worked in database management. And now I work in intellectual property for Doc Martens. So thank you, guys.